It's no secret that US foreign policy displays a bias towards Israel, but that rarely gets openly confirmed. For 11 years, Josh Paul was a senior official in the US State Department's Bureau of Political Military Affairs. He's now resigned over what he calls the Biden administration's, quote, blind support for one side. In a PBS interview, Paul gave his reasons for quitting.
We're talking about the transfer of arms that can last for decades, whose purpose is to kill. That's an obvious point, but it underlines the gravity of the decisions that we make every single day in the US government, in the State Department. Recognizing that, the Biden administration earlier this year issued a conventional arms transfer policy which raised the standard for the transfer of weapons to what they call a more likely than not. If it is more likely than not that weapons the US provides to another country will be used for violations of human rights, they will not be transferred. What we've seen with Israel repeatedly in operations in Gaza in 2009, in 2014, 2021, is massive civilian casualties, thousands of Palestinians killed through a relatively indiscriminate use of bombs to destroy buildings. And yet, in this context of this conflict today, where we've already seen, again, thousands of Palestinian casualties, there has been no policy debate. Indeed, there's been a rush to provide arms where normally there is discussion, consideration, and thought.
So the Israeli Defense Forces, I should say that they only target Hamas officials, Hamas weapons, and rocket launch sites. It sounds like what you said at the end there is one of your key criticisms. Did you raise your concerns within state, and what was the response?
I raised them, in fact, as soon as 2 days after the Hamas atrocity. And let me just be clear, that was an atrocity and an outrage. Full stop, period, no further caveats. Shortly after that, I raised concerns that, look, we've seen that for 20 years, the provision of security assistance to Israel, and for longer than that, has not led to peace. And instead, it has used the way it has employed that security is actually led us further from peace. And so I wrote to a number of leaders within the department 2 days after Hamas's attack and said, I recognize that there's going to be a demand signal for arms to Israel. Can't we for once stop and think about if this is actually getting us to where we need to be before we move forward?
And what was the response?
No response.
No response. Now, I mean, there's a lot to talk about there. The thing that sort of initially stood out to me and somewhat confused, he said they've raised their standards, and their new standards are if it's more likely than not that a weapon will be used to sort of to do a war crime or to do humanitarian atrocities, then we won't sell it to them. But that's already a very, very weak standard. If it's more likely than not that it will be used to commit war crimes, then we won't send it to them. So what was it before? 50-50? If it's only 50-50 that they're going to commit war crimes, yeah, we might as well sell it to them then, right? The threshold is now, it has to be, there's a greater than 50% chance that it won't be used to commit humanitarian atrocities. What a moral superpower we are looking at. Of course, he's saying even by those very weak standards, the United States isn't upholding them when it comes to selling arms to Israel, because it is in fact more likely than not that Israel will use those weapons to commit war crimes, because we see them repeatedly over and over and over again doing it. They're currently collectively punishing the Gazan people for the attacks of the 7th of October. That's a war crime, right? They're currently indiscriminately, I mean, it seems like it, if you're looking at the number of entire families that have been killed, indiscriminately bombing Gaza, which is, again, a war crime. So this guy is saying, this guy who's working in the State Department, it's very clear that by our own very weak standards, we should not be transferring arms to Israel, yet we still are. And when I raise that this is a problem, people completely ignore me. I don't get a response. Let's hear what Josh Paul said next.
And how unusual is that?
It's extremely unusual. If you think about other countries in the region, I won't name names, but there are obviously a number where there are troubling human rights records. And the debate over arms sales requests that come from those countries can last within the administration itself for months, sometimes even years.
During your time, though, the United States, for example, I will name names, provided arms to Egypt, widely criticized for its human rights abuses, and to the Saudi coalition that have killed many, many civilians in Yemen and accused of violating the laws of war by Human Rights Watch. Why do you not resign after those arms transfers?
Because those were cases where I could make a difference and manage through my work and the work of many others in the department to add some elements to it. So, for example, there is a training program that has been going on now with Saudi pilots to improve their targeting. And in the case of Egypt, of course, we have Leahy vetting, where units that are identified to be involved in gross violation of human rights are not eligible to receive US weapons. There is a Leahy vetting process for Israel. It has never found an Israeli unit to be guilty of a gross violation of human rights. It's a broken system.
It's a broken system, right? That's incredible, right? We've seen what the Israeli army does when it goes to war in Gaza. We've seen that what it does is clearly what they do involve a lot of war crimes. They bomb hospitals, for example. Now, it's going to be very difficult to justify that. Yet, the vetting process that they have done of the Israeli army has never found anyone to have done anything wrong. It's always been completely above board. Now, if you're looking at Israel go to war, I've done it a number of times this century, and you're looking at the results of those wars, to find that no rules have been broken. It's all been fine, all been cushy, all been above board. That suggests to me that those investigations are a farce, frankly, not just faulty, a farce. Now, let's go back to that interview.
Isn't that proof that the vetting that State Department does do, you say, of the Israel's defense forces have not found a violation of Leahy? Does that mean that they don't violate Leahy?
Well, they've identified many, but they have not been able to come to a conclusion which requires senior level sign-off within the department.
Just to be clear, are you saying that there have been units inside Israel's defense force that the State Department has been concerned about?
Yes.
Their violations or their actions, you've brought that to senior officials, and over the years, consistently, they have not acted on that?
That is correct.
These questions, of course, were put to Matt Miller, the State Department spokesman, earlier today. Let's take a listen to what he said.
We comply with all applicable statutory requirements and regulatory requirements in our provision of military assistance to Israel, as we do to every other country in the world.
Isn't that what the U.S. pushes, and isn't that the policy?
I think Matt is right. We have complied with the laws. The problem is that the laws are intentionally vague in some cases. So, for example, they require a determination that something has happened in terms of gross violation of human rights before sanctions, as they were, could be applied. So, yes, absolutely, we are acting within the law. The question is that good enough? And we are certainly not acting within the conventional arms transfer policy.
Now, that was a really strong allegation, because essentially what he's saying there is that the civil servants in the State Department, they are finding that there have breaches of their policy among units of the Israeli army. But every time they come to that conclusion, it gets blocked from the political appointees above. So that suggests it's not a legal question here. It's not that sort of their lawyers are looking at this and saying, oh no, it has all been above board. It suggests that the civil servants, the lawyers, the people who are sort of have a slightly more objective view of the policy than the politicians, they are finding that there are lots of breaches, and when it gets sent up to the politicians, to the policy people, right, it gets blocked. Very, very, very concerning, although I have to say, not remotely surprising. Now, that interview comes in the context of President Joe Biden reportedly asking Congress for an extra $14 billion to fund Israel's war on Gaza. In a primetime address to the US nation, he explained why.
In Israel, we must make sure that they have what they need to protect their people today and always. The security package I'm sending to Congress and asking Congress to do is an unprecedented commitment to Israel's security that will sharpen Israel's qualitative military edge, which we've committed to, the qualitative military edge. We're going to make sure Iron Dome continues to guard the skies over Israel. We're going to make sure other hostile actors in the region know that Israel is stronger than ever and prevent this conflict from spreading. Look, at the same time, President Netanyahu and I discussed again yesterday the critical need for Israel to operate by the laws of war. That means protecting civilians in combat as best as they can. The people of Gaza urgently need food, water, and medicine. Yesterday, in discussions with the leaders of Israel and Egypt, I secured an agreement for the first shipment of humanitarian assistance from the United Nations to Palestinian civilians in Gaza. If Hamas does not divert or steal these shipments, we're going to provide an opening for sustained delivery of life-saving humanitarian assistance for the Palestinians. As I said in Israel, as hard as it is, we cannot give up on peace. We cannot give up on a two-state solution.
Well, as we keep saying on this show, if what you want is a two-state solution, the answer isn't to arm to the teeth the side with all the power. The reason we haven't had a two-state solution is because Israel has all the power. It has all the power because the Americans only send weapons to one side, right? So you're saying we must not give up on peace, so we'll send unprecedented military funding to a state that's killed more than 4,000 Palestinians in less than 2 weeks. There is no possible way in which the route to a two-state solution is by sending Israel even more arms, so their power is even more overwhelming vis-a-vis the people they would need to negotiate with if there were to be a two-state solution. It's a lie, frankly, to say he is both sending Israel more weapons and he's in favor of a two-state solution. There is no way that those two things can be made compatible. Helena, what do you make of, I suppose, the comments from the State Department official who's just resigned, and then also that address to the nation from Joe Biden? Beyond, I personally, to blow my own trumpet, but I could teach him a few lessons about reading from an auto cue.
I mean, the thing is they obviously have continually funded Israel for a very, very long time and continually to do so. I think we'll all remember those pictures of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez crying in the House chamber, having been forced to change her vote from no to present on the Iron Dome funding bill. I believe that was in 2021, right? So there was always pressure within the Democratic Party from those above them to be able to, and obviously in the Republican Party, that should go with as a given, quite frankly, for pushing them towards continually funding loads and loads of American taxpayer dollars into the pockets of Israel to again, as you say, to push us further and further away from an actual solution by giving them the weapons that they are now currently using to do the things that we know to be against international law. But unfortunately, the State Department are not getting those claims ratified by the people above them to get the actual funding at least put under any sort of review on this one. And the reason for this, obviously, as we all know, is because Israel explicitly serves America's geopolitical interests in the region. And this is a direct quote from Joe Biden. Israel is the best $3 billion investment that we have. If there wasn't an Israel, then America would have to invent one. That's a direct quote from Joe Biden that he said about how it is necessary for Israel to be continually funded by America to serve their own geopolitical interests. And he went further in a different interview to say that how many battleships, how many troops would there be in the area of the world were there not in Israel that was being continually backed by the United States? So it's very, very clear what their intentions are. And even very kind of frustrations like, do Israel or do they not actually contravene international law or not, are things that are unconcerning to the political people with the power to be able to put these kind of funding under review, etc., etc. What I would caveat all of this with as well is that there is one thing that is getting in the way of Joe Biden being able to do this, and that is currently a deadlock in the House of Representatives since Kevin McCarthy was ousted as Speaker. It's going to be very difficult for them to quickly pass this military aid package for Israel through Congress when there is currently no speaker. There's currently no actual speaker that looks like they're getting in because Jim Jordan doesn't have the votes. So there was the potential for this funding bill not even to pass Congress, which would at least give some respite for the Palestinians from the continual aid being shoveled into the pockets of their occupiers.